Employers are expecting candidates to negotiate their salary, but did you know that actually only a little under half of people ever negotiate? It's a real shame. I think people are leaving money on the table, and I'm on a bit of a mission to help people feel more confident when they're entering a salary negotiation and at least have a bit more information at their disposal so that they can approach those conversations in a more confident and competent way. So, we want to set expectations for salary relatively early if we can, but the place to absolutely not do that is in the interview. So you want to avoid at all costs being stuck in an interview situation where somebody asks you what your salary expectations are. And we'll talk in a moment about how to handle that if it does come up, because it will. But if you can, before you get to the interview room, if you can be asking about salary, if you can be asking about benefits and try and understand what the broad budget is, that would be a really great thing. Sometimes you might find organizations will even have a form that you fill out before you apply where they're asking for your salary expectations. And again, the key here is to try and name a range and to not name a particular number, because one of a few things will happen if you tell them your salary expectations in the interview or too early in the process before you found out what it is that they're offering. And that is, you'll either underprice yourself or you will completely price yourself out of the market. There's usually no in between, I find, when I'm working with people. So before you get in the room, the key here is research. Use all of the information at your disposal. If there is salary information on job boards or job ads, try and use those. Look at the Internet Archive, look at Glassdoor, look at PayScale. Resources like this are going to help at least give you some data points. If you know people that have worked in the organization, perhaps you could ask them these questions as well. But the research side is going to equip you to be dealing with the conversation in a much more confident way. The other thing you can do is perhaps look at their annual report. So consider what sort of financial position that they're in. Are they the sort of organization that does have the liquidity and the success? That means that they might pay at a higher percentile. And on that topic, talking about percentiles, if you're not sure how organizations actually benchmark salary, they do that independently generally, especially large organizations. And they benchmark that effectively against the level or the work value of the role itself. So they grade that in terms of its scope, its seniority, its impact, what it's required to do effectively. And then they compare that with data sets for other organizations to decide where it sort of sits in terms of seniority. But then the other key thing that organizations do is they make decisions on where they want to position themselves in the market. So what you'll find is a lot of organizations will put themselves at the 50th percentile. So meaning they pay about the same amount for the same level role as other organizations do. But some organizations will choose to pay at the 75th percentile, the 100th percentile, or perhaps even further than that. And typically those organizations really want to lock people in with salary. They're typically very profitable organizations who can afford to do that. And as a result, they can command top talent. But for most organizations, that's not the case. They'll generally be sitting somewhere between the 50th and the 75th percentile. So if you can get a bit of an understanding of where they're paying, you can then be able to relate that to other roles in the market. So if you see a similar level role where maybe they're publicly disclosing what that salary is, and you also know from looking at their remuneration policy on their website that they equally pay at the 50th percentile, then you could make a reasonable guess that perhaps that organization might pay something in a similar range. So I mentioned earlier that you want to avoid talking about this in the interview itself, and really timing's everything here. So you do want to let the employer initiate the conversation, but you want to be ready to discuss it. So if it's too early, if you don't have enough data points, it's okay to put it off until later. It's okay to say something like, look, I'd like to understand the role a bit more. I'd like to understand what more of the context, other benefits that you might offer before I name a figure, and that's okay. The best thing to ask them though is what their budget is. So you really want to get them to put a stake in the sand and to tell you what it is that they're willing to pay for the role. That's going to put you in a much more powerful position in order to move forward. But if you are absolutely forced into giving a figure, give a range. And I want that range to start at what you're ideally looking for and then go above that. Typically about 10 to 15 or 20% above. And the reason for that is you don't want them offering you below that. They will generally tell you pretty quickly though if that they can't offer that. So they'll be usually upfront. If you name a figure and they can't pay it, they'll typically say, look, we were thinking it was more in the vicinity of this range, and then you can make a call on whether that's right for you or not. But always give a range if you have to ask more broadly. Now, salary is not the only thing. You actually do want to understand what the total compensation looks like. Some organizations may offer other tax incentives, so not for profits, for example. There may be other things that you can package within your salary. There may be other benefits, things like bonuses, car allowances. Some organizations pay leave loading, which is where they pay you extra while you're on leave. It's not that common anymore, but you do still find it sometimes. Other organizations will pay more into your retirement savings. So there are a range of different benefits that sometimes can offset a salary that perhaps is a bit lower. Perhaps they might invest in study. So some organizations have very generous study policies where they contribute a percentage of the fees associated with the further education that you're doing. They may have world-class training that they run inside. So there's a whole range of different benefits that you can think about. Now, what you will find may come up as well is they may actually ask you what you're currently making. And this can be a really confronting question. And in fact, in many regions around the world, it's actually illegal to ask the question. And I typically form the view that it's not that relevant. So it doesn't matter what somebody's making. It matters what that person is worth to that organization and the value that they're bringing to that organization. And that's what should be most important. But the question will come up. So one, be aware of if it's actually illegal to ask in your jurisdiction, and you'll be best placed to understand that. But if it does come up, I do think it is important to try and redirect that conversation. So, let them know that you would prefer to focus on the role and what the role is worth and understand what their budget is. So flip it straight back to them. Ask the question back. It's very difficult for them to keep asking you that question. They may still do that, and then you've got a call to make around whether you feel comfortable in sharing that information or not. But try and keep the discussion as forward focused as possible, and don't feel pressured to disclose anything that you don't have to disclose. So if it feels icky, move on. It might be the sign that that isn't the right organization for you anyway. The key thing for you to be doing though is showcasing your value. So what you want to be doing is throughout the interview process, sharing the transformation, the impact, the value that you've delivered to the organizations that you've worked for, and therefore how that relates to the compensation that you're bringing. You can take them back and remind them of some of those examples as you're going along the process. Saying things like, would you consider adjusting the offer to reflect the impact that, I described at XYZ time, is a really fair thing to ask. Now, you will get pushback sometimes. So if the offer is too low, there's a few things that you can do. You need to decide whether this is an organization you really want to be in and whether you're willing to consider something that is lower. I really do think that you have to be crystal clear on what you're going to get out of that organization, because too many times I work with people who go in anyway, they accept the lower offer, and in 6 months they're looking for something new because they're not getting from the organization what they wanted. And in fact, they start to feel devalued. They start to feel like they're not being respected in the organization. So be clear on what you're going to get out from it. If it's about getting that organization's brand on your CV, great. If it's about stepping into a leadership role or increasing your leadership capacity, great. But be really, really clear on what you're going to get out from them if you're going to stay there. So the thing you really want to be doing if the offer is low is trying to negotiate and push it further. So always do that in a respectful way. Thank them for the offer, reinforce your enthusiasm and motivation, but let them know that perhaps you're expecting something a little bit higher, and ask them whether they might consider X figure. Move it up about 10%, see how you go there. It's really difficult to kind of just restate what your expectations were and expect to get that. It very rarely happens. And what you do want to have happen in any negotiation is that they have an experience that you're acting in good faith, you're easy to deal with, and that they're able to get to a mutually beneficial outcome. That's really important. Now, if you can't get any movement on salary, then start exploring the other benefits. So they've got their standard benefits that the organization will provide, but perhaps there are other things that they could include for you specifically. So could there be additional leave? Could there be bonuses that they look to create? Could you work in a really flexible manner? Might you be able to work 9 days in the fortnight rather than the full 10 days? So explore those options with them and see whether you can get something that might offset the lack of salary that's there. Now, if negotiations stall, if you can't get to where you want to be, you need to be prepared to walk away from the conversation. You need to look at yourself in the mirror and be really clear at what the minimum amount that you're happy to take this role for is. And if you can't get there, walk away. If you are not clear on what that figure is, sometimes you might try and negotiate a little bit higher and the organization will walk away. They might say, look, thank you, but we're going to pursue other candidates. And so if you're actually way above what your minimum was, you're going to feel pretty disappointed. So know what the minimum is, be very clear on it, and be happy to walk away if that's the case. Now, last and final thoughts here around negotiating, confidence and body language. So all of your nonverbal cues are really important. If you're there in person, thinking about how you maintain eye contact with them, think about how you maintain a posture of confidence. Put your feet firmly on the floor, through your heels, sit in a powerful position so that you can communicate confidently. Be aware of your tone. Try and adopt a lower tone if you can. It's more influential. Try and avoid or be aware of when your tone starts to raise, or maybe when you're starting to take more shallow breaths. We typically do that when we're nervous, and that will come through. If you're not confident in what you're asking for, then they will see that and they'll know that they can possibly offer you something lower, or you might create doubt in their mind around whether you're actually worth what you're asking for. So I hope that was really helpful. If you're interested in learning more about careers, interviews, or being a better leader, then this is the place to hang out. It's a relatively new channel. This is my second video that I'm uploading. So let me know in the comments what you thought. Would love any feedback, and I'll see you next time.